Today we're diving into the ancient port city of Adulis. This is Part 1, the Rise of Adulis, 300 BC to 200 AD. We'll explore the early history of Adulis, a period when it thrived as a prominent city-state in the Erythraean Sea. Adulis was one of the most important trading cities on the Red Sea. Merchants and travelers from as far as Rome and India visited the shores of the Gulf of Zula, where Aduli is located. At its peak during the reign of Negus Caleb in the 6th century, Adulis boasted a fleet of over 60 ships and 100,000 soldiers, serving as the launching point for the Aksumite invasion of Himyar. But today, we're focusing on the early period of Adulis, from around 300 BC to 200 AD. During this time, Adulis was a bustling port city where merchants conducted trade and local rulers and inhabitants resided. The actual harbor where ships moored was likely at a site called Gabaza, as mentioned in historical texts like Martyrs of Nadran. Adulis is now located over 5 kilometers from the Gulf of Zula, but it's theorized that in ancient times it was much closer to the sea, approximately 3.3 kilometers. Due to siltation, the ancient city now lies further inland. Adulis is situated next to 3 rivers, with the northernmost being the Hadas River, on which Adulis is located above. Merchants used the Hadas River to travel to the town of Kohaito and then to Aksum. The origins of Adulis likely date back much earlier. Humans have inhabited the seacoast of modern-day Eritrea, including the Gulf of Zula, where Adulis is located, for hundreds of thousands of years. This area was one of the first regions from which modern Homo sapiens branched out of Africa. Later, the inhabitants near the Gulf of Zula traded with the other side of the Red Sea. During the agricultural revolution and the rise of Egyptian civilization, it's theorized that one of the main ports of Punt was located near the Gulf of Zula, from the 3rd millennium BC to the 1st millennium BC. Subsequently, as the influence of South Arabian kingdoms rose, trading shifted eastwards during the 1st millennium BC. Around 522 to 523 AD, the explorer and merchant Cosmas Indicopleustes ventured to Adulis. He was part of a group of merchants sent from Alexandria in Egypt. Upon landing at Adulis, Cosmas remarked on a marble throne with inscriptions on its sides. Next to this throne lay a stele made of basalt. Cosmas noted that the Negus Caleb had asked the governor of Adulis, named Abbas, to have the inscriptions on the throne and stele copied and sent to him. This task was assigned to Cosmas and his fellow merchant, Menas. They made multiple copies of the inscriptions, one for the governor and another for themselves. Here's an excerpt from Cosmas about Adulis.
On the coast of Ethiopia, 2 miles off from the shore, is a town called Adul, which forms the port of the Axumites and is much frequented by traders who come from Alexandria and Eilat. Here is to be seen a marble chair just as you enter the town, on the western side by the road which leads to Axumis. This chair appertained to one of the Ptolemies who had subjected this country to his authority. It is made of costly white marble such as we employ for marble tables, but not of the sort which comes from Proconnesus. Its base is quadrangular, and it rests at the 4 corners on 4 slender and elegant pillars, with one in the middle of greater girth and grooved in spiral form. The pillars support the seat of the chair as well as its back against which one leans, and there are also sides to right and left. The whole chair with its base, 5 pillars, seat and back, and sides to right and left, has been sculptured from a single block into this form. It measures about 2 cubits and a half it is, and is in shape like the chair we call the bishop's throne. Behind the chair is another marble of basonite stone, 3 cubits in height and of quadrangular form, like a tablet, which at the centre of its upper portion rises to a sharp point whence the sides slope gently down in the form of the letter lambda, but the main body of the slab is rectangular. This tablet has now fallen down behind the chair, and the lower part has been broken and destroyed. Both the marble and the chair itself are covered over with Greek characters. Now, when I was in this part of the country some 25 years ago, more or less, at the beginning of the reign of the Roman Emperor Justinus.
From these excerpts, we learn about the structural details of the throne and the stele. The throne was made of marble, while the stele was made of basalt. Basalt, a common volcanic rock found in the Danakil Depression south of Adulis, was likely mined and used to construct the stele. By the time Cosmas visited Adulis in the 6th century, the stele had been broken, with its lower part destroyed. The exact reason remains uncertain, but it's unlikely that it was left unrepaired due to a lack of will. It's more plausible that the stele was deliberately broken and left in that state because it was disfavored by the local inhabitants and the regional king. Possibly due to the inscriptions on its lower part. The stele was approximately 1.5 meters tall and had a rectangular shape similar to other steles found throughout the highlands. Interestingly, Cosmas mentioned that on the back of the chair, Hercules and Mercury were depicted, indicating Greek influence in the pre-Christian belief system of the area. The Ptolemaic dynasty ruled Egypt and was founded by Ptolemy I, a general of Alexander the Great. This dynasty lasted roughly 300 years, from 305 BC to 30 BC. On the stele, Cosmas found an inscription detailing the conquests of Ptolemy III.
The great king, Ptolemy, son of King Ptolemy and Queen Arsinoe, twin gods, grandson of the two sovereigns King Ptolemy and Queen Berenice, saviour gods, sprung from Hercules the son of Jupiter on the father's side, and on the mother's side from Dionysus the son of Jupiter, having received from his father the kingdom of Egypt and Libya and Syria and Phoenicia and Cyprus, and Lycia and Caria, and the islands of the Cyclades, made an expedition into Asia with forces of infantry and cavalry, and a fleet and elephants from the troglodytes in Ethiopia, animals which his father and himself were the first to capture by hunting in those countries, and which they took down to Egypt, where they had them trained for employment in war. And when he had made himself master of all the country on this side of the Euphrates, and of Cilicia and Pamphylia and Ionia, and the Hellespont and Thrace, and of all the forces in the provinces, and of the Indian elephants, and had also made subject to his authority all the monarchs who ruled in these parts, he crossed the Euphrates river, and when he had subdued Mesopotamia and Babylonia, and Susiana, and Persis and Media, and all the rest of the country as far as Bactriana, and had collected all the spoils of the temples which had been taken away from Egypt by the Persians, he conveyed them to that country along with the other treasures, and sent back his troops by canals which had been dug. Such was the inscription on the tablet, so far as we could copy it out, and, but for a few words, it would have been the whole, for it was only a small part of the tablet that had been fractured.
This inscription boasted about Ptolemy III's war with the Seleucids, known as the Third Syrian War, and mentioned using elephants captured in the lands of the troglodytes and Ethiopia. Elephants are a recurring theme in the accounts of merchants and travelers to Adulis. Ptolemy III led an expedition to Mesopotamia in 246 BC, but there's no evidence he reached as far as Thrace or Afghanistan. These claims likely stem from the conquests of his predecessors, notably Alexander the Great. During Ptolemy III's reign, significant advances were made in acquiring elephants from the Ethiopian and Eritrean highlands. These elephants were transported via large boats from Adulis up the Red Sea, as well as through trade routes to Elephantine using the Nile. The erection and dedication of the stele were likely in gratitude for the use of elephants in their conquests. The use of elephants from Adulis by the Ptolemaic dynasty is further evidenced by their deployment in the Battle of Raphia in 217 BC near modern-day Rafah in Palestine. During this conflict, Antiochus III, the Great of the Seleucid Empire, faced Ptolemy IV of Ptolemaic Egypt. According to the Greek historian Polybius, around 73 African war elephants were involved in the battle. Genetic studies have revealed that these elephants were forest elephants from Eritrea. A person who rides an elephant is called a mahout. The mahout sits behind the elephant's ears and uses a rod to tap the elephant's ear to command it for different actions. These rods used by mahouts can still be found at Adulis. Even in modern times, Eritrea is home to the largest population of elephants in northeastern Africa. Unfortunately, only about 100 remain, largely restricted to the Gashbarka region of Eritrea. Pliny the Elder, although he composed his works around 77 AD, drew much of his information about Adulis from the earlier writings of King Juba II of Mauritania, who lived between 48 BCE and 23 AD. This highlights Adulis' significance as a crucial port city since at least the 1st century BC, emphasizing its importance in regional trade and navigation. The first mention of Adulis appears in Pliny the Elder's Natural History, published around 77 AD. This work, the first known encyclopedia, although not entirely accurate, covers various sciences across multiple books. Book 6, which focuses on geography, has numerous mentions of Adulis, such as,
We then come to the town of Suche, the island of Daphnidis, and the town of the Adulitai, a place founded by Egyptian runaway slaves. This is the principal mart for the troglodytes, as also for the people of Ethiopia. It is distant from Ptolemais 5 days' sail. To this place they bring ivory in large quantities, horns of the rhinoceros, hides of the hippopotamus, tortoiseshell, sphingii, and slaves.
Pliny mentions a legend suggesting that Adulis was founded by Egyptian slaves. The name might be linked to douloi, meaning slaves in Greek, with a, indicating a lack, thus implying a lack of slaves. Though this etymology lacks corroborating evidence, it might refer to runaway slaves brought to Adulis during the Ptolemaic period. While no direct evidence supports Egyptian slaves establishing the port, it's plausible that over millennia-old Egyptian trade via Adulis and the Red Sea led to such myths. This trade likely resulted in population mixing and cultural infusion, creating a fertile ground for legends like this one. Pliny also describes how both Ethiopians and troglodytes engaged in maritime trade with ancient Egyptians. For instance, he mentions that at the island of Elephantine in Upper Egypt, Ethiopians would carry their boats to avoid the rocks at each cataract. The excerpt reads as follows.
Aristocreon says that the distance from Elephantis to the sea is 750 miles, Elephantis being an inhabited island 4 miles below the last cataract, 16 beyond Syene, 585 from Alexandria, and the extreme limit of the navigation of Egypt. To such an extent as this have the above-named authors been mistaken. This island is the place of rendezvous for the vessels of the Ethiopians. They are made to fold up, and the people carry them on their shoulders whenever they come to the cataracts.
In many of Pliny's writings, Ethiopians refers to the inland people south of Egypt, while troglodytes describes those living near the coast. Trade with Egypt likely occurred through an inland route, using the tributary rivers of the Nile and navigating through the cataracts. The trade route was probably established as far back as Puntite times. These boats traveled vast distances, possibly as far as India. By around 500 AD, Cosmas confirms that Adulis merchants were in Sri Lanka, suggesting they may have undertaken extensive journeys even earlier. Merchants brought their trading goods such as textiles, raw materials, and luxury items to markets in and around Adulis. Archaeological remains of one such market, discovered by Dr. Daniel Habtemikkel, reveal an 18.12 meter by 15.40 meter structure with a lower storage area for goods. This market structure underscores the bustling trade activity that once flourished in Adulis, a hub of commerce connecting various cultures and regions. The Periplus of the Erythraean Sea, written between 50 AD and 100 AD, offers a detailed account of Adulis. While the exact authorship is disputed, A date around 60 AD is often proposed by scholars like Wilfred Harvey Schaff. This text not only describes Adulis, but also details the journey merchants took inland to Kohaito and Aksum. For example, it mentions animals hunted near Adulis, including elephants and tortoises on nearby islands. The following is an excerpt.
Below Ptolemaeus of the Hunts, at a distance of about 3,000 stadia, there is Adulis, a port established by law, lying at the inner end of a bay that runs in toward the south. Before the harbour lies the so-called mountain island, about 200 stadia seaward from the very head of the bay, with the shores of the mainland close to it on both sides. Ships bound for this port now anchor here because of attacks from the land. They used formerly to anchor at the very head of the bay by an island called Diodorus, close to the shore, which could be reached on foot from the land, by which means the barbarous natives attacked the island. Opposite Mountain Island, on the mainland 20 stadia from shore, lies Adulis, a fair-sized village, from which there is a 3 days' journey to Kolowe, an inland town and the first market for ivory. From that place to the city of the people called Auxumetes, there is a 5 days' journey more. To that place all the ivory is brought from the country beyond the Nile through the district called Caeneum, and thence to Adulis. Practically the whole number of elephants and rhinoceros that are killed live in the places inland, although at rare intervals they are hunted on the seacoast even near Adulis. Before the harbour of that market town, out at sea on the right hand, there lie a great many little sandy islands called Alilai, yielding tortoise shell, which is brought to market there by the fish-eaters.
The excerpt reveals much about the fauna near Adulis, highlighting the presence of elephants. While modern-day elephants in Eritrea are largely confined to the Gashbaka zone, they were more abundant in antiquity, even near Adulis. Evidence of elephant artifacts can still be found throughout the region, underscoring their historical significance. The Periplus of the Erythraean Sea also provides insights into the ruler of a vast region, including modern-day Eritrea, Sudan, northern Ethiopia, Djibouti, and northern Somaliland. This ruler, Zoskes, controlled extensive territories described in the text. The following is an excerpt.
On the right-hand coast next below Berenice is the country of the Berbers Barbaroi. Along the shore are the fish-eaters Ichthyophagoi, living in scattered caves in the narrow valleys. Further inland are the Berbers, and beyond them the wild flesh-eaters and calf-eaters, each tribe governed by its chief. And behind them, further inland in the country toward the west, there lies a city called Meroe. Below the calf-eaters there is a little market town on the shore, after sailing about 4,000 stadia from Berenice, called Ptolemaeus of the Hunts, from which the hunters started for the interior under the dynasty of the Ptolemies. This market town has the true land tortoise in small quantity. It is white and smaller in the shells. And here also is found a little ivory, like that of Adulis. But the place has no harbour, and is reached only by small boats. Below Ptolemaeus of the Hunts, at a distance of about 3,000 stadia, there is Adulis, a port established by law, lying at the inner end of a bay that runs in toward the south. Before the harbour lies the so-called Mountain Island, about 200 stadia seaward from the very head of the bay, with the shores of the mainland close to it on both sides. Ships bound for this port now anchor here because of attacks from the land. They used formerly to anchor at the very head of the bay by an island called Diodorus, close to the shore, which could be reached on foot from the land, by which means the barbarous natives attacked the island. Opposite Mountain Island, on the mainland 20 stadia from shore, lies Adulis, a fair-sized village from which there is a 3 days' journey to Kolowe, an inland town and the first market for ivory. From that place to the city of the people called Auxumetes, there is a 5 days' journey more. To that place all the ivory is brought from the country beyond the Nile through the district called Caeneum, and thence to Adulis. Practically the whole number of elephants and rhinoceros that are killed live in the places inland, although at rare intervals they are hunted on the seacoast even near Adulis. Before the harbour of that market town, out at sea on the right hand, there lie a great many little sandy islands called Alalai, yielding tortoise shell, which is brought to market there by the fish-eaters. And about 800 stadia beyond there is another very deep bay, with a great mound of sand piled up at the right of the entrance, at the bottom of which the obsidian stone is found, and this is the only place where it is produced. These places, from the calf-eaters to the other Berber country, are governed by Zoskales, who was miserly in his ways and always striving for more, but otherwise upright and acquainted with Greek literature.
The territories described by the author of the Periplus were under the control of Zoskales. Specifically, the area described extends from the calf-eaters to the other Berbers. The calf-eaters are mentioned to be below Berenice, while the other Berbers are referenced near the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, close to the entrance of the Red Sea, just before reaching Avalites. This region likely encompasses areas from modern-day Assab in Eritrea up to Berbera in Somaliland. Interestingly, in the excerpt, the author describes Zoskales as miserly and driven by greed, possibly indicating a tyrant ruler with ambitions for conquest. He also notes that Zoskales was familiar with Greek literature. This is significant because, as mentioned earlier, Cosmas found inscriptions in ancient Greek on the throne and the stele behind it in Adulis. It is strongly suggested that elites like Zoskales were bilingual, proficient in both the indigenous Ge'ez language and Greek. This is not surprising, given that the kingdom was a port city visited by merchants from various backgrounds, with Greek being the lingua franca for many during that period. Originally excavated in the early 1960s by the Ethiopian Institute of Archaeology, the king's residence at Adulis consists of a single-story building with several rooms and a balcony. According to Dr. Daniel Habtemikkel, the northern section of the building was constructed at a later period. Therefore, during the earlier period of Adulis, when Emperor Zoskales lived, the building was composed solely of the southern structure. The author of the Periplus discusses the trade that took place in this region. He specifically mentions the items imported into these lands and provides a brief overview of what was exported. This information offers valuable insights into what the people in Zoskales' domain valued and desired. The following is an excerpt.
There are imported into these places undressed cloth made in Egypt for the Berbers, robes from Arsinoe, cloaks of poor quality dyed in colours, double-fringed linen mantles, many articles of flint glass, and others of marine made in Diospolis, and brass, which is used for ornament and in cut pieces instead of coin, sheets of soft copper used for cooking utensils, and cut up for bracelets and anklets for the women, iron, which is made into spears used against the elephants and other wild beasts, and in their wars. Besides these, small axes are imported, and adzes and swords, copper drinking cups round and large, a little coin for those coming to the market, wine of Laodicea and Italy, not much, olive oil not much, for the king gold and silver plate made after the fashion of the country, and for clothing military cloaks and thin coats of skin of no great value. Likewise from the district of Arica across this sea, there are imported Indian iron and steel and Indian cotton cloth, the broadcloth called monarch, and that called sagmatogene, and girdles, and coats of skin and mallow-coloured cloth, and a few muslins and coloured lac. There are exported from these places ivory and tortoiseshell and rhinoceros horn. The most from Egypt is brought to this market from the month of January to September, that is, from Tibi to Thoth, but seasonably they put to sea about the month of September.
The author of the Periplus of the Red Sea provides detailed descriptions of the clothing and textiles prevalent in the dominion of Zoskales and its neighboring regions. He notes that clothes were commonly imported from Egypt, particularly robes from Arsinoe, a city situated near the Gulf of Suez at the northern end of the Red Sea. These robes were notable for their quality and were a significant part of the trade. Additionally, linen mantles were another form of clothing mentioned. These mantles were essentially garments made from linen and wool, with cloaks that covered the head, providing both comfort and protection from the sun. The text also discusses various materials used in ancient manufacturing. Flint glass and murine, a mysterious substance utilized in ancient Greece and Rome, were commonly crafted into vases and cups. These materials were prized for their unique, often discolored appearance, which added to their aesthetic value. The city of Diospolis, located in Upper Egypt, is highlighted for its association with brass. Brass was a versatile metal used for making ornaments and coins, which facilitated trade. Sheets of soft copper were also mentioned. These were employed by locals to create cooking utensils, drinking cups, and accessories, such as bracelets and anklets for women. Iron was an important import, used extensively for making spears. These spears were not only employed in hunting elephants for ivory, but were also essential weapons in warfare, particularly in the kingdom of Zoskes. Other metal tools like axes and swords were also in use, indicating a sophisticated level of metalworking. A limited amount of wine was imported from Laodicea, modern-day Turkey, and Italy, primarily reserved for the royalty, such as King Zoskes. Additionally, gold and silver plates, intricately decorated in the cultural styles of his dominion, were part of the luxury items for the king. Military cloaks, likely chlamys made of wool, were used by the military, hunters, horsemen, and travelers in ancient Greece, and thus likewise were probably used by similar groups in Adulis and its periphery. The text also mentions coats of animal skins, which were probably worn for additional layers of protection. Archaeology, a region in ancient India, is noted for its exports to the Red Sea region. Indian iron, steel, and cotton were highly valued imports. The author also mentions specific fabrics, such as mallow-colored purple, cloth, and colored lac, a dye made from insects that produce a reddish color. These fabrics and dyes were significant for their quality and color, which were highly prized in ancient textile markets. From the dominion of Emperor Zoskes, significant exports included ivory, tortoiseshell, and rhinoceros horn. These items were collected at Adulis and its surrounding areas, as corroborated by multiple texts from that era. The trade in these valuable commodities highlights the region's rich natural resources and its strategic importance in ancient trade networks. While direct information on the religious rituals in Adulis is limited, we can infer some practices by analyzing ceramic evidence found at the site. These ceramics, despite the uncertainty in their precise dating, provide valuable clues about the religious and cultural practices during the earliest occupation periods at Adulis. While direct information on the religious rituals in Adulis is limited, we can infer some practices by analyzing ceramic evidence found at the site. These ceramics, despite the uncertainty in their precise dating, provide valuable clues about the religious and cultural practices during the earliest occupation periods at Adulis. In the context of the wider region around Adulis, extending into the highlands up to Aksum, oral traditions dating back to Greco-Roman times recount the tale of Arwe, a large serpent-like creature that once ruled the region. This serpent prevented people from crossing the Red Sea. According to the tradition, a brave man mounted on an elephant managed to kill Arwe. The use of the elephant as the hero's mount is significant, as the main export from Adulis at the time was ivory-related products, including elephants for warfare. In conclusion, Adulis stands out as one of the earliest political city-state entities in the Horn of Africa. From its inception, Adulis engaged in extensive trade with neighboring regions, establishing itself as a significant commercial hub. The city's trade routes extended both overland and across the sea, reaching the Arabian Peninsula and traversing the Red Sea to Egypt. Over time, Adulis expanded its trading network to include interactions with the Greeks and Indians. This extensive trade is well documented by Greek merchants and travelers who visited and recorded their observations of the city. As detailed in this article, many contemporary cultural practices in Eritrea and Ethiopia, especially in terms of clothing, can trace their origins back to this historical period. The name Eritrea itself and the emergence of the first city-state in the Erythraean Sea are rooted in this era. The legacy of Adulis is evident in the enduring cultural and historical influences that continue to shape the region today. Thank you, everyone, for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it.